evening. We are so glad that you're here tonight. This is our third presentation on the Common Core standards that we will be giving to you. Our first two actually happened in 2011 when the Common Core standards were first adopted, and we did a community conversation, and I see a familiar face in here who was at our first community conversation. How many of you are familiar with the Common Core or have read anything in the newspaper about the Common Core? Great. So the Common Core standards came into existence in the year 2010 when 45 states, the District of Columbia, and 3 territories adopted the Common Core standards. The Common Core standards were written in English language arts and mathematics. And now we have official standards in science, calling the next generation science standards. I think 2010 was the year that really changed the playing field in education for a number of reasons. First of all, for children who are in those states and territories, it's put all children on a level playing field. Until now, states had their own state standards. They used their own state tests. And a child coming from California to Arlington Heights, or a child coming from Missouri to Arlington Heights, didn't necessarily have all the skills, habits, and attitudes that were taught to our students. So with common assessments and the Common Core standards, it really does put all children on a level playing field. The next thing that the Common Core standards have allowed us to do is to really look at our own practices and the strategies we use to teach children in the areas of English language arts and math. Although the standards don't explicitly state what kind of practices we should use, it's really implicit in the standards. The importance of the standards are that they want to prepare students for college and career readiness. And all of us know that in the past 5 years, what our students need to know, understand, and be able to do has changed significantly with all the changes that have occurred globally. So we're very excited for this adventure. There are publishing companies racing to create new series or to put a stamp on a series that says Common Core Ready, when in actuality what they may have done is just tweaked a few pages in the textbook. So publishing companies, young entrepreneurs in the area of publishing are all looking to race to the top to see who's going to be first one there to kind of win contracts in all different states. So it has become a business enterprise also. And you will read blogs or comments in editorial sections of the newspaper where people will either be supporting the Common Core or they'll be against the Common Core because they feel that the federal government has interfered with the rights of the states. So you will hear all of those things. But when you do, I want you to just kind of move them to the background, because when you think of what your kids will be learning and how they'll be learning is what's important about the Common Core. So tonight, we're going to provide you an opportunity to practice some of the things that we're going to be asking your students to do with the Common Core standards in English language arts and math. Next year, we'll have another session, and we expect every one of you to come and to bring a friend when we're going to be talking about the next generation science standards. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dwayne Main, who is our new Director of Teaching and Learning, who's going to talk about what are those major shifts that have happened with the English language arts standards and the math standards. And then Christine Trendle, one of our teaching and learning facilitators, will give us all practice exercises to try in English language arts to really gain a deeper understanding of what we're going to be asking of your children. So I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne.
Thank you. So the Common Core standards changes the way that we look at teaching and learning across the country. And I wanted to spend some time discussing the shifts in the areas of language arts and math. And we're going to begin with literacy. In our K-5 schools, or our elementary schools, the standards call for a balance or an equal balance between informational and literary texts. Informational reading includes reading in the key content areas of social studies, science, the arts, and technical subjects. At the secondary level, the standards call for language arts teachers focusing very heavily on literary nonfiction. And I also want to share that it's important to understand that the standards call for teaching literacy across all disciplines, or specific disciplines, meaning, again, social studies, science, the arts, and technical subjects. The standards also emphasize the importance of students being able to look at text or take evidence from text and critically and carefully present well-defended claims. And students also have an opportunity to focus on more text-based evidence as a result, as well. Narrative writing is a focus across all grade levels, but there's more of a focus in the area of informational writing and argument in the later grades. The standards also call for the importance for kids spending a tremendous amount of time and having regular practice with more complex texts so that they are more so prepared for the demands of college. The standards emphasize a staircase or build a staircase of complexity so that kids are more college and career ready as they prepare for transition from high school to college or to the workplace. And there's also a tremendous amount of focus on more difficult words or academic vocabulary words so that students can have better comprehension of the text. So now I would like to discuss the shifts in the area of mathematics. The standards call for significantly narrowing the scope of content and focusing very heavily on the standards that's emphasized so that students can develop and gain those foundations in the areas of mathematics. The standards also emphasize carefully connecting learning across all grade levels so that students can have or so that students can actually build on learning from previous grades as well. So as a result of this, teachers can certainly be sure that, that students will have deep conceptual understanding of the core content, and they'll also understand that, that moving forward through the standards is not an additional event, but it's an extension of previous learning. And lastly, I wanted to talk about rigor in the major topics, which includes conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application. So what do we mean by conceptual understanding? In terms of conceptual understanding, that means that it's more than just teaching kids how to arrive to the answers, but teachers are expected to work closely with kids in terms of kids gaining access to various perspectives regarding key concepts when it comes to mathematics as well. And it's also important to understand that conceptual understanding supports the critical areas of rigor, which include fluency and application. And when it comes to application, That means that as a result of the learning that students receive through mathematics instruction, they're actually able to apply their learning to real-world applications. So this gives you a brief understanding of the shifts in the areas of language arts and math. And I wanted to ask the group, at this time, we're going to do a quick, brief activity. If you can turn to your partner, we only have a few, but if you can turn to your partner and if you can briefly discuss what you think the similarities are with the mathematics shifts and the language arts shifts. What do you think are some of the similarities?
Can I ask a question about the math focus?
Sure.
The change, isn't that the exact opposite of the everyday math? Because my understanding of the everyday math was that you just touched on subject, came back to them, you touched on the subject, came back to it, you touched on it beginning.
Well, everyday.
The everyday math curriculum.
Yeah.
So are we getting it, is it this, are we not going to do the everyday math curriculum?
No, we're going to continue with the everyday math curriculum. And, it's
But
important.
that to me doesn't sound similar. It sounds to be the opposite of it.
Well, the everyday math curriculum actually, in terms of teaching the everyday math curriculum, there's a focus on conceptual understanding. That's a huge component of the everyday math curriculum. And, we plan to, at this point, continue with the math curriculum as well. So there is.
Teachers have told me, we're just introducing it. They're not supposed to have mastered it at this point. We're just introducing the concept. So that's not, you're not telling me what teachers have told me.
Okay. You are correct.
Okay.
And there are other pieces of that as well. So first of all, you're right in the fact that everyday math introduces a number of concepts that spiral through the curriculum, which is very different than the grade level expectations that they're talking about here. So we will have the same expectations for our kids at various grade levels. At the end of second grade, we will expect the same mastery that's looked at the Common Core. Right now, Everyday Math has done a crosswalk between their program and the Common Core. We have purchased that crosswalk with the activities that deal with where mastery needs to take place. The new series that will be coming out with the Common Core, and they've already completed grades K through 2, will address all of the standards and where they will be taught. I believe, although none of us have seen it yet, but from our close work with the University of Chicago and their Math and Science Center, that there will still be some introduction of conceptual ideas that maybe don't have to be developed all the way by the time a child is in second grade or a child is in third grade. So we would never put materials in the hands of a child that did not match the standards that everybody in the United States is expecting. But there are some powerful pieces in everyday math, which I believe they will keep, and then they will make sure that not only kids meet the standard in second grade, but those kids who are capable to go above the standard in second grade, there will also be materials and different methods to go about helping those children advance in their math skills.
The material is there in the everyday math. It's just that it's going to be on the onus of the teachers for a year or so until the University of Chicago starts
Exactly.
giving us more materials.
Exactly.
So they'll be working towards.
And yes, and the spiraling in everyday math is similar in concept to the staircase of complexity of skills in the Common Core. So we introduce topics and skills in everyday math, and then we build on them in following years. And it's similar to the way that the Common Core is rolled out. So something is done at a more basic level in kindergarten, let's say computation, as it is in first grade. So the spiraling is in that nature of building on skills. So we're continuing to look at that, but It's really similar, and like Dwayne said, the conceptual understanding in everyday math and the mathematical practices, which we're going to talk about a little bit later tonight, are really well aligned, and we're really giving kids multiple opportunities and strategies to solve problems, which is a lot of what the Math Common Core really supports. So we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that.
And it's also about, everyday math will talk about beginning, developing, and secure, and that secure word is really mastery, and that end point you hope to get to.
So before we actually take a look at the ELA standards a little bit more closely, I wanted to point out to you what's available in your folder. So right on the front is a sticker, and at the bottom of that sticker is a website that I think you'll find really helpful if you want to learn more about the Common Core. It's corestandards.org. And then inside your folder, your sides are divided into resources for the literacy standards and then the math standards. So the colored sheets, when you open your folder, summarize the shifts that Dwayne shared with you earlier tonight. The blue side is your literacy resources. So I just wanted to point out to you what's in there. The way the Common Core standards are organized, and you might be familiar with this if you've done some reading on your own, but there are anchor standards for each subcontent of reading. So what I did is I pulled the anchor standards for reading. So every child, K5, is held, or K5 and then 612. So you have the K5 anchor standards on the top and then the 612 anchor standards on the bottom. The anchor standards are divided into categories: key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and range of reading and level of text complexity. So these anchor standards are truly the anchor. This is what explains what every child is expected to do. And then for each grade level, the anchor standard is written more specifically. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a moment. But in addition to the anchor standards, you have a packet that says Common Core State Standards Shifts for Students and Parents. This has literacy and math resources in there for you. It's from the website engagenewyork.org. And what we've put together here for you is, this talks a lot about what it means for you as a parent. So what these shifts, what kind of conversations you can have with your children, how you can support them in the work that they do at home. And it goes into pretty great detail. There's a really nice, this is a really nice website, and their web address is listed at the bottom of the cover page. In addition, we also created a little spot for you if you wanted to take some notes on the literacy standards as we go through this evening. On the math side, you also have your shifts on the top. You have some examples of a grade 3 math standards and what those look like, and these are broken down into, these are the math content strands, and then on the next sheet is an example of what the standards look like in 3rd grade. So it's a domain, a standard, and then it's what's called a cluster, which are really the descriptors under the standard that explain in more detail the expectations of the student in that math strand. You have a handout for the mathematical practices, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and then you have a spot to take some notes once we get to the math section. So what I wanted to do for you is show you what what the English language arts, what an anchor standard looks like from grade level to grade level. So we're going to take a look at anchor standard 2, which is identify the main topic and retell key details of a text. So this is what that standard looks like in 1st grade. The anchor standard is determine central ideas or themes of a text and analyze their development, summarize the key supporting details and ideas. So in 1st grade, more specifically, it's identify the main topic. Really, what is this text about? So this might be something that you read aloud to a 1st grader, or they might read independently depending on their readiness. Sunlight gives these leaves energy to make food. Like us, plants need food to grow. But green plants do not eat food as we do, their leaves make it. So something you might ask 1st grade students to do with this is tell me, what is this paragraph mostly about? What is the main idea? What is the author trying to teach you? Which is probably sounding a little bit similar to something that you would ask children to do in a classroom. The difference is now with the Common Core, you're going to ask a 1st grader to tell you what evidence or what did they read in the text that helped them decide what the main idea would be. So looking at this, I want you just to think about what clues in this paragraph point you to the main idea. Okay, so this is what the standard looks like in 4th grade. This is that 2nd anchor standard if you want to look at your sheet. It's determine the main idea of a text and explain how it is supported by key details, summarize the text. So this is a text that you might read aloud or read with 4th graders. It's a text by Russell Friedman titled Immigrant Kids. Many immigrants could not speak English when they arrived. They knew little about American laws and customs, and so they could mingle with their countrymen and speak their native languages. Almost every major city had its German and Irish neighborhoods, its Polish, Italian, Jewish, and Greek districts. People from the same village in Europe might wind up living as neighbors on the same street in America. So again, you would ask students in 4th grade to determine what's the main idea of this paragraph. What is the author trying to teach you? And again, you would ask them to use evidence from the text. What did you read that helped you decide the main idea? You would ask kids to record that and to actually cite the evidence from the text. So it's really similar to what we're doing in 1st grade, but the text is getting more complex. So it goes back to that idea of one of our shifts. You want to increase the rigor of the text that kids are using in class. And you're going to do that in a variety of ways. So it might be read aloud, it might be in guided reading, it might be in independent reading, or it might be whole group instruction where each child has a text in their hands. So if we look at this in 7th grade, the standard is very similar. Determine 2 or more central ideas in a text and analyze their development over the course of a text. Provide an objective summary. So now, not only are we just identifying the main idea, but we're also deciding, are there other main ideas? Is the author trying to teach me more than one thing? As the text increases in complexity, the author usually has a lot more to tell you. The other difference is you're going to try to decide as a reader, how does the author develop this idea over time? And does the idea change throughout the text? So this is actually an excerpt from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and I'm going to read it to you because it's kind of small. But as I read it, as an adult even, I want you to be thinking about what is this paragraph or these 2 paragraphs mainly about, and how do you know? How can you decide? The slaves selected to go to the great house farm for the monthly allowance for themselves and for their fellow slaves were particularly enthusiastic. While on their way, they would make the dense old woods for miles around reverberate with their wild songs, revealing at once the highest joy and the deepest sadness. They would compose and sing as they went along, consulting neither time nor tune. The thought that came up came out, if not in the word, in the sound, and as frequently in the one as in the other. They would sometimes sing the most pathetic sentiment in the most rapturous tone, and the most rapturous sentiment in the most pathetic tone. Into all of their songs, they would manage to weave something of the great house farm. Especially would they do this when leaving home. They would then sing most exultingly the following words, I am going away to the great house farm, oh yeah, oh yeah. This they would sing as a chorus to words which to many would seem unmeaning jargon, but which nevertheless were full of meaning to themselves. I have sometimes thought that the mere hearing of those songs would do more to impress some minds with the horrible character of slavery than the reading of whole volumes of philosophy on the subject could do. So as you listen to this text, you probably notice some things that might be a little bit different. You might find this surprising to read in 7th grade. It is pretty complex, and there is a lot of academic language. The author is definitely presenting these ideas in a complex way. So if you think about what the main idea of these 2 paragraphs are, you probably had a hard time narrowing it down just to one idea. We've taken teachers through this process of what we've taken you through tonight, looking at text from multiple grade levels, regardless of the grade level that you teach, to see how this skill increases in sophistication from 1st grade to 4th grade to 7th grade. But not only how the skill changes, but how the use of the text changes, how the text becomes more complex, how the author presents more than one idea, how the author uses a lot more specific language. None of the words in this text are defined for you. There's nothing in bold, there's no glossary. It's something that really the child has to do on their own. And in the primary grades especially, it's going to be done through a lot of conversation. So what this means for teachers is that they're going to use text in a more purposeful way for eliciting what the author is trying to tell you. They're going to look at the text, look at its craft, the author's style, how is the author presenting the information, and design activities that allow for the children to draw those conclusions on their own by just using the text. So teachers are starting to scaffold children a little bit differently. So instead of providing background information prior to reading this text, I'm not going to tell you much about Frederick Douglass or about this trip to the Great House Farm. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions as you read that purposefully send you back into the text to seek answers. And it's really making meaning from the text by thinking about what the author tells you. Can I answer any questions at this time about the ELA, either the anchor standards or the text complexity? Yes.
Yes, because one of the things that seems like it's a goal, but it's missing, and I'm realizing it when I just tried to mentally go through this exercise, is that I find it impossible to read any text in isolation of every other text you've ever read, or movie you've seen, or conversation you've had, or life experience, right? And it does seem like the focus is almost on like, forget all that, only feedback what this particular text idea is. So I guess it's linking to my bigger question is where in the curriculum then will students get practice in or encouragement to kind of synthesize information from across subject areas, from across academic years, and or create their own point of view based on all the stuff I've read, or I've kind of put two things together and created an independent idea that nobody fed to me, that I would think in terms of readiness for life and creative problem solving, we want them to learn how to do. I don't see that in here. So could you speak to that
Absolutely.
Yes, that's a great question.
It's a great question, and it's almost like you read every single standard, because everything that you were suggesting that it appears to be left out in this activity that we did, they are all explicitly stated in the standards when you go through them.
Okay.
That ability for children to synthesize is extremely important. They will be given 2 or 3 texts as an example on a standardized assessment, which is going to be part of PARC, where they're going to have to bring all that information together and draw conclusions. They're also going to be working with multimedia and text. So they'll be listening to a podcast or watching a particular video and taking a particular piece of literature and having to tie it all together. Kids coming up with their own opinions is extremely important, and that argumentative writing is critical, and they will be discovering their own ideas. You can even take it from this Frederick Douglass piece, because if we were all to sit around here and discuss what we thought was the main idea, I bet we'd come up with 5 or 6 different main ideas, because in a reading, it's not like a textbook where you teach the kids, okay, you read the first line, and then usually you find the main idea in the first sentence. I mean, that's how we used to approach it. Well, the meaty part, the important part, so that we get kids to be critical readers, critical thinkers, to be able to synthesize. Where's your evidence? This is only one type of activity that you do. Where's your evidence for that? There are many right answers. I mean, we'd have to go back to this reading and pull in a lot of text and probably not get one analysis of what the author is trying to say in this, but numerous analysis, which would be, each would have their evidence for. So all of those things that you talk about are critical, and they are in every single grade. Just starting, it's going to look very differently in the first grade standard than it is in the 7th, then they cluster 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. All those are critical, and they are all explicitly addressed in the standards. Christine, did you want to add something
So
to that?
perspective and point of view and critical analysis comes into the integration of knowledge and ideas, which is standards 7, 8, and 9. And something I think important to point out is even in first grade, in kindergarten, you want children to have multiple perspectives on a topic and have some really rich discussions on how the author's point of view differ. So something, for example, that you could do just in the very young grades is read 2 books on sharks. And I've done this with teachers, where one book about sharks is titled like The Majestic Creatures of the Sea, and the other one is like Carnivorous Beasts. And the books had the same statistics. Literally, one author said there are as few as 232 shark attacks per year. And the other text said there are as many as 232 shark attacks per year. So you would read those 2 texts with kids, ask them to pull out the main ideas and go through the key ideas and details and the craft and structure. But then when you get to the integration of knowledge and ideas, it's not only how do these two authors' viewpoints different, but what text do you have in the support, what evidence do you have in the text to support it, but then it's also making meaning for yourself. So coming into that argumentative writing, it would be, what do you think about sharks? But not just what do you think, but what did you read about sharks that helped you form that opinion? So citing that text. So it really does come full circle as you go through the standards. So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah, you're welcome. So I think Dale is going to walk you a little bit through the math standards if there's nothing else I can answer for you regarding the literacy.
So welcome to math. You've now left English language arts and it's time to turn to math. I just want to share a little story about the history of these math standards. When the authors created the Common Core standards in math, they had hoped that content standards and standards for mathematical practice would be integrated so that you just didn't look at the skill on one side and then look at the mathematical practices. When the standards came before the Governors Association and chief school executives from all different states, there was debate about this. And so the standards have come out as the content standards and the standards for mathematical practice. And the content standards people refer to as the nouns of mathematics. Those are the facts, the skills, and the understanding. The standards of mathematical practices are the processes and the proficiencies. And I'd love you to take out this sheet. It's on your math side, and it's called Mathematical Practices. They have it in the real language of the standards, and then they have it in the student-friendly language of the standards. And if you look at the mathematical practices, they really relate to the skills that many people describe as 21st century skills, or those habits of mind. Can kids persevere? Can they create models? Can they attend to precision? Do they reflect upon what they're doing? Those are very important life skills, and they are part of the mathematical practices. So are you ready for a problem? Okay. It's a little fuzzy, but how many of you remember solving problems like this, either on standardized tests or at the back of your math chapter on fractions? I see heads shaking, I see hands going up. So this is the kind of problem that you would find on an ISAT test. Some of you may have taken the Iowa test or whatever test they had given years ago. I'm going to now show you what the Common Core standards are asking kids to be able to do. So you can do this alone, you can do this with somebody sitting next to you, but I want you to read this problem and just try to figure out what the answer might be. Can you all see it from there? Do you want me to read it to you? You can see it? Okay. I'm just going to give you one more minute, and then we're going to have a little dialogue. Okay, so let's talk about this a minute. I'm really curious to see how you might have gone about approaching this problem. Christine, can you walk around with your mic so we can hear people? Anyone? How did you go about approaching it?
I added up the fractions and got a common denominator and did it that way.
Okay. Thank you. Did anyone else have a different method?
How many eights did we eat?
How many eights did you eat? Clever.
Oh,
Clever.
We'll work on grammar later.
Anybody else? What did you notice differently about this problem? Dwayne, can you go back to the one before? The other ones, because they were really both dealing with a concept of fractions. Yes?
So, sorry, that's okay. So you have to read through the materials rather than very quickly looking at this example that has the numbers spelled out very precisely.
Exactly, and this puts it more at an application level than just at that operational level. My favorite expression from the Common Core is read like a detective and write like an investigative reporter. And I think that line applies to not only the English language arts standards, but it really applies to the math standards as well. And let me just share with you why I think that. Dwayne, you want to move to the next one? Thank you. One of the most important things that teachers need to do when they're getting children to understand how to apply mathematical concepts is you want to be able to understand their thinking and how they came to a particular conclusion about a problem. Because that's the way you get to that metacognitive level about how kids are thinking about their thinking. So in this particular problem, this child's model was taking each of the characters who were involved with eating the pizza and sharing the pizza, and this teacher is actually able now to look at what mathematical skills and what mathematical processes or application they were able to use. And from this, the teacher is really able to think about how this child is thinking about math and perceives math. And we call this a mathematical model. So one of those characteristics about the mathematical practices, we want kids to get used to making models to reflect their thinking. And so this is a big change in the way that math will be taught and how children will have the opportunity to apply those mathematical skills to real-world problems. This would be a 5th grade problem. And so you hope that the children have gained enough mathematical skills, the first side, when we're talking about those nouns, so they can apply them to this side, which is the mathematical practices. And that's kind of an example of where math is going and what this involves for teachers. We've spent a year and a half now working with the middle school math teachers and the high school math teachers, and their practices and the language that they use with kids is going to have to change. And teachers are going to need, whether it's in English language arts or math, to do less of the talking and to allow students to do more of the talking so that they're the ones who have that engagement. The teachers are there to ask those coaching questions, those important questions, to have them move forward. So any questions? You had your hand up about math.
How would the 5th grade math teacher assess this, if that were the answer?
This right here could be the assessment. And what the teachers in the 5th grade together would do, and what we would do as all of the 5th graders in the district, it's really important to look at student work, and from student work to create some type of rubric. So it's the thinking process that's going in there. Sometimes you're only interested in the thinking process. Many times you're interested in both the process and the product. So together, it's an organic process. You take a look at what are those skills, what are those mathematical practices, and how do you want to evaluate this particular piece of work or these types of work the kids are creating around one concept.
So are teachers doing that in teams, or are they doing that in?
We are doing that. We have not started with although the elementary teachers have been introduced to the standards, we began the work starting with the end in mind. And so teachers have been creating these together. We practice writing common assessments, which is not an easy task, but it's one of the best purposeful learning opportunities that you can provide to teachers. And then they actually, all of them agreed to give the same assessment and then to come back together and to analyze the results. And why did you have these results? And why did you have these results? And what particular pedagogical strategies did you use to get these results? And what did you use? And now there's X% of kids who really got this. They understand it conceptually. Now what's our next step with those kids? What about the kids who didn't get this conceptually? So it's a lot of conversation between teachers, but that's the way that all of our practices will improve, which in turn will improve learning for students. Question?
I was rather proud of myself because I didn't have the pen. I got through it very, very quickly in my head, which I'm usually not good at doing. But what if, and chances are a fifth grader is going to have to write some things down.
Yes.
But what if a student here said 9/8 equals 9/8, it's the same?
Okay.
Would you be looking for, well, can you go back and, I don't see the common phrase, show your work, but you're saying, show all your work.
Right. So I would say, how did you come to that conclusion? What was the reasoning that you used? Oh, explain some more. What do you mean by adding? What pieces did you add?
What Luis ate and what Tito ate. And
Okay.
first I noticed it was halves and quarters.
Okay.
And then, I had to switch to eighths. And I was hoping there were going to be thirds in there.
Okay. And you weren't hoping there would be thirds because fourths and eighths. What did you find between the similarities between those?
They were all divisible. by
Right,
eighths,
right,
So I could figure
right.
eighths.
So I can.
It's easy enough to do in my head.
Right.
24th.
So you would have showed your work in some way. But if you just said to me, in the middle of doing this problem, hey, I have it because 9/8 equals 9/8, I may have just walked over to you and say, Phil, share with me. How did you come? What was your reasoning? What was that model that you had in your head?
The student might, or the teacher might ask the student.
Exactly,
verbally,
exactly.
how did you come?
Especially if, kids were working quietly and you just got it like that. I'd really want to understand that reasoning. I would probably ask you to go back to paper. Why don't you just take a minute and draw a model for me of what that would look like, or just show me the mathematical computation that you used to get there. And I'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay, we'll see what I do.
Thank you.
That's a good point, because I would, if I had to go back in time and do it this way, I would fail. Because
Okay.
I had zero patience, I was always in a rush, and I would get excited by the challenge of solving the
Right.
problem and bored silly with what to me would have been the tedium of going back and explaining how I did that.
But you may have never had to do a model like this.
I'm sure I didn't, but I'm just saying other kids who maybe
Right.
are wired like me may
Right.
struggle with that because it's, it's the boring part.
Right. But there is something about as mathematics gets more difficult, and you are not able to do that 9/8, equals 9/8. You have to go through some thinking about thinking. And that's what this is all about. It's getting to that higher level. It's getting to that conceptual understanding. It's being able to apply that conceptual understanding to whether it's the next level of math or you're applying it to a physics problem that you need to do in physics class. So we hope that as kids begin to be trained like this, there will always be mathematicians like you, and there will always be mathematicians like you. And your gifts, you have it. But by training kids and to really, as I said, read like a detective, because if you go inside those little ones' brains, they really have to be able to sort through all of this type of information and then use, an investigative reporting method to report it, whether it's a model in science or whatever, or whether it's looking for a synthesis between three texts. And I think that's really the essence of what the Common Core is trying to get to. So thank you. There's no way that you would do this, with every single problem that a child is doing. But no,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing with the reading that Christine was showing you. That's what we call a close reading activity. So the whole text, oh my God, we would be, our kids would be out the door, and so would our teachers. So the purpose of doing this is to give you one tiny snapshot of some of the things that your children might be doing as it's related to the Common Core. When the students are reading the book of Frederick Douglass, one of the important things is that the teachers look carefully at a passage, 1 or 2 pages, and do this close reading where you want them to read and then you want them to find evidence to support a claim that they're making. That is one of 15 to 20 or 30 strategies that you would use. But it's an important one because it's short, it's focused, and you want kids to be able to practice the skill of close reading. The statistic in the United States, and certainly Arlington Heights does not fall in the general United States, 50% of students, even those students who have scores in the range of 20 on their ACT, and the ACT goes up to 36, so 24 is usually the average in districts, and districts like ours higher. 50% of those kids are taking writing or reading remedial classes in high school. In college, excuse me, who might have done very, very well. And that's why when Christine showed you the example of the complexity of text, what it looked like in 1st grade and 4th grade and 7th grade, it just shows you that we have to keep building on that. When No Child Left Behind came into being, and when states were really working, what are we going to do to bring up that lower end of students? 10 years before that, textbooks and their readability level went down dramatically. So what students were reading in the late 80s and the 90s and the 2000s was so very different than what they had been reading before that, where the complexity of texts were much greater. So textbook companies were watering down things, and kids just weren't getting the level of rigor or complexity that they needed to have. So glad you brought up the point, you brought up the point, and you brought up the point. This is just one sample. So in the assessments that the teachers were doing in math in our middle school, they had one problem on the assessment where they asked for this, where they could understand what their kids were doing. The rest of the problems did not look like this. There may have been variations. So thank you for bringing that up so that I could clarify, because I didn't want you all to think that we were, just this was the method of teaching.
And I think
That's
something,
rigor.
yeah, I think something else that's important to note is that text complexity is highlighted as one of the shifts, but that's not the only text that you want to use with students. So there still are foundational literacy standards in the Common Core. So there's still a focus on teaching kids at their instructional level to develop kids as readers. But when you engage kids in complex text or a little bit more rigorous text, you're giving them access to thinking that they might not have access to in a text that's at their instructional level. So, and like I said, with that narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, or even the immigrant kids, or the how plants make food, if students couldn't read that independently, that doesn't mean that they can't read it and engage in it with you as a teacher or with a parent or with a group of students. So it's just this shift in thinking that even though kids can't read the text, we still want to engage them in the type of thinking that the text requires. So it's just one change, and close reading is just one way to do that, and that's what I modeled for you, but there are certainly other ways to engage kids in text with the use of media and photos. I could have created centers in the room around immigration or slavery and had you look at pictures and take on the role of a person in the picture and what are they thinking, and I could have taken you through a lot of close reading with other media, but we just really wanted to show you what a complex text might look like and how kids might be asked to use it on a basic level. And main idea and details is just one of the standards. There are certainly others. So it's just one snapshot. So I just want to make sure that you you know that foundational literacy still is a focus and a priority, especially in the primary grades. And there are standards for that as well in the Common Core. So,
Other questions this evening?
Well, just an observation. Isn't a lot of the stuff that you were talking about in language arts similar to the Melcons that the kids are doing right now, as soon as in 8th grade? Where they have to find some concepts and put them down and analyze things and...
Melcon is one strategy that you can use for that synthesis of information. As we work, and Christine's been working with our language arts teachers for a little over 2 years now, they have, I'm sure your children have been exposed to a number of the strategies that they have used with this close reading, et cetera. I think some of your kids in middle school read Phineas Gage, which was an example of bringing
writing
all
about
this
text.
information together. Yeah.
And then a lot of the math stuff seems to be feeding right into the IEP program at District 214, kind of.
In terms of,
In terms of taking the concepts and using them.
oh, the application, absolutely.
Application.
Absolutely.
So some of this is already happening, it's just,
It's not happening consistently. All the teachers do not have the strategies. Frequently, you would hear science and social studies teachers saying, I'm not a reading teacher. You know, I'm my content. But boy, the rich reading that needs to take place and analysis in those content areas and in those technical areas are critical to the success of our kids. So it's a shift in the way that strategies are used. And I'm just going to give one personal example, which Christine gave. I was a language arts teacher, and boy, middle school, did I love everything that I taught the kids. I loved it so much that I spent a quarter of probably the first period, you might have had teachers like me, telling you everything about the author and telling you everything about the story. And if you were an average reader, you didn't ever have to pick up that book because I told it to you and I was the expert. So what did I expect back on the test? I expected you to feed back my analysis of the book. I really wasn't, you know, I was probably interested in their analysis. I got better really as the years went on. But seriously, think about teachers who you have had do that in your lives, whether they're in college and you knew that you had to put down the teacher's analysis of that particular poem or book. We don't want our kids to be a generation of those type of children. We want them to have to work very hard. We've been doing some elementary lessons on science in the Common Core, and one of our 5th grade teachers had conferences and said to the parents, so how's it going with your kids? You know, we're doing this new approach of this close focus reading. And the common response she got is our kids are exhausted when they come home because they're good students. And they're not used to grappling with complex texts and having to synthesize and having to find claim and evidence. So it's an interesting process. I think it's going to make us all better educators, and I'm hoping that in terms of us learning new strategies and practices, that our kids, not only are they poised for success now, but the success rate we will see will even be greater because of these Common Core standards. So, yes.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but one of the concerns I have with my son is which teachers he's going to get or when he first entered middle school, because they have different teaching styles, and teachers are individuals and have different strengths. And it sounds to me like with the core standards, we're really seeking consistency. And I'm wondering how, without compromising each teacher's individuality, how we can get each teacher to be consistent in what he or she is teaching the children. Are there training programs, and how is that all?
So
We'll share some of our examples that are happening in this district right now.
that's a really great question, and something that we've really been focusing on, especially, so as Dale said, we've kind of started with the end in mind with the middle school, and then we've been moving down into the elementary schools with our professional development of teachers. Specifically with the middle school language arts teachers, we really have been training them on the pedagogical shift. So as a teacher, what does the Common Core mean? How is it different? And to provide an example, the way that teachers provide scaffolding is really going to change. So rather than me standing up and telling you everything you need to know about the novel, so before you open up, and then there were none, I'm not going to tell you everything about the time period and everything about what's happening in the world and about the characters and where they're from and what it's like there. I'm going to help you get that information from the text as we read it. So I'm not going to replace the need for you to read the text. I'm going to make the reading of the text more meaningful for you by asking you really purposeful questions and stopping at some really deliberate passages. So as a teacher, I'm going to know, on page 7, paragraph 2, I know that kids are going to miss this idea, or most kids struggle with this. So we're going to reread it and talk about it and maybe do some close reading of it. So the way that we train teachers in a pedagogical shift, such as how to provide scaffolding, is something we've really been focusing on. So it's training them in the pedagogy and then letting them implement it with consistent materials that will give us that consistency. So there will be a balance of curriculum that's consistent, pedagogy that is shared, and autonomy in the style in which I teach. Does that make sense? Okay, and we're starting to move down with that in the elementary grades. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're focusing on there, the idea of complex text for elementary teachers is complex. It's really hard to balance, especially in the primary grades, early literacy with text complexity, and showing teachers how rigor is engagement, and how by giving kids a text that maybe they couldn't read at their instructional level, they can definitely think about and draw conclusions and analyze and have really rich conversation. So we've really been training teachers right now in the preliminary phases of how to introduce complex text with your students, how to teach content or literacy across your content areas, and what that might look like. So pedagogically, what strategies can I use? Something like an instructional read aloud. So rather than just reading a book because we enjoy it and we love to read it, maybe I'm going to read out aloud an informational text that's related to our science unit. We're going to talk about it. What did we learn from it? And related to literature, we're going to stop and talk about how an author maybe develops their main idea like we did earlier. So it's really giving teachers the tools and the pedagogy to move forward in something that's shared.
And the other part of consistency that you were talking about, common assessments are really critical to this entire process, because whether I had teacher A or teacher B, the expectations should be the same at the end of a particular unit. And the richness of teachers improving their practice comes when they sit and analyze student work, whether it's a short writing piece that they're doing, or whether it's a response to multiple kinds of problems. Because when I sit with my professional learning community or my purposeful learning community, I can say, your kids really did well on this, but my kids didn't. What are some of those strategies that you use? Because frequently, teachers have been like independent contractors. They were in their rooms, they had their 30 students, and they had a lot of freedom to teach what they chose. So you're right, 2 6th graders 5 to 10 years ago may not have had the same experience in science nor in language arts, but now they will, still having that individuality, because we hire people for their individual gifts as well.
I think that was maybe the point you were making about balance.
Yes.
Because honestly, we are pretty spoiled in this district. I mean, even our bad teachers are so much better than the average. But the great ones are so fantastic that you want almost, an 80-20, so that maybe 80% is consistent, but
Exactly.
personally,
Exactly.
I'd rather take the gamble, give them 20% to do whatever they want.
Absolutely.
Because some of them will just, strike gold.
Absolutely.
There's some teachers that are so creative and engaging, and not every kid loves the same kind of teacher, but, at least.
Or the same kind of activities they provide,
Right, but it would be nice not to, just bring everybody kind of to the middle by enforcing too much
Right, so
uniformity.
that's exactly right. So our core curriculum is actually not a year-long curriculum. It takes up part of the year, a majority of the year, and then there's room for teachers to and students to do some independent study and bring into some other topics that maybe they've explored in a novel or So we definitely share that viewpoint.
Yes, absolutely.
What
And
percent, it is, I mean, it's probably not as scientific as a percentage, but
We're still
roughly-
developing our curriculum because everything's changing with the Common Core. So I can't give you a percentage, but it's going to be a really nice balance. And teachers are part of the decision of how much curriculum do we need to ensure that all students can meet these expectations of the Common Core at the end of the year, and how much wiggle room do we have in our curriculum and can we create together. But certainly have conversations about what we're choosing to do and why we're choosing to do it, and still looking at student work.
so it's not that it comes from top down. I mean, our job is to create that conceptual framework.
Right.
And then our job is to support, just like Christine is a coach, to be in those classrooms and to support them in whatever ways we can. Julie?
What is the assessment that would tell if a student has reached the Common Core?
It's going to be the PARC assessment. There are 2 assessments. 23 states joined one consortium and 23 states joined the other. And the money was given by the federal government to create these assessments. Ours is called PARC, and the other one is Smarter Balance. And actually, 2 days ago, on the PARC, capital P, capital A, capital R, capital C, they just came out with some exemplars about what some of the testing might look like. So I've just started to skim it and see some examples, but I think you'll enjoy it and I think it might actually have helped that you came to this presentation tonight, because you'll be able to bring this information when you look at the kind of problems to really see how they fit. As in every good plan, sometimes money is a problem, sometimes time is a problem. There are different factors. One of the beauties of both of these consortiums was the fact that it wasn't just going to be an end-of-the-year test like an ISAT is, or whatever state you live in has that kind of test, but it was really going to be formative assessments as well, where information, since it's all computer-based, would be able to be provided to parents and to teachers, and in some cases to students, so that they would be able to look at where they are, the areas in which they need to grow. We still don't have that final determination whether it's going to be given twice a year, 3 times a year, or the saddest thing would be just to give it as a summative assessment at the end. But we still don't have that information. That's still in the works. But please go on the site. I think you'll find it very helpful.
I believe it's parkonline.org, actually.
And when are those supposed to start? You don't even know that?
Yes, 2014, 2015. I didn't say it, but it's 2014, 2015.
Okay.
And that's why
Hoping to do some piloting next year.
Okay.
And does that take the place of the ISAT?
it does.
It will, yes.
So next year will be our last year. Correct.
Yes.
Any other questions?
And we're supposed to be doing that? It's Common Core standards right now.
We are at the beginning of the implementation process. As we said, we started with the middle school. We have some pilots going on at the elementary
I'm sorry,
school.
I don't mean to interrupt. The ISAT also did change some of their questions this year to attempt to align it more closely with the Common Core. And we're really interested to see what that's going to look
Right.
like and how scoring might
Which
change.
ones are, okay.
Actually, 20% of the ISAT, is now more so aligned with the
The
Common
Common Core. And then they changed the scoring for what will be considered meeting expectations and exceeding expectations as well. Yes.
And then the MAP test has also, which your children take in the spring, has also become more aligned with the Common Core. I'm sure they will keep refining
Yes.
that, but last year we did take the MAP test that had the most recent version with the most amount of Common Core questions on them. Questions?
This is kind of beyond this conversation here, but do you know if there's an audit process or an expansion process for the Common Core standards?
Meaning?
Meaning like we do these have been implemented in some states this year, next year, the year after. We start looking at them globally. We realize, you know what, the kid's brain function isn't here at kindergarten or at high school, or we're overstepping what college is doing with 12th grade. If you've read the 12th grade curriculum, there's nothing to do freshman year of college right now.
It's 11th and 12th grade together.
The 12th grade. So I mean, is there going to be an audit process, do you think, or an
I
assessment? I'm curious.
have never heard of an audit process at this particular
That's
point.
fine, yeah,
No. And I think another thing that's really important for you to know is a decision that we've made in the district. We are not rushing out to buy English language arts materials. We are doing this through an organic process. We have become steeped in the standards. We have turned to some of the best experts in the country in terms of English language arts, and we are going to select the materials. We are going to work with teachers to develop the common activities that will be used, the common tasks that we're going to be asking kids to do, because we're not an average district. And it's important that we communicate with other like districts of ours to be working together. We have a very, very close relationship with District 214 and have just worked diligently with them. We did a whole day workshop where District 25 and District 214 presented together to all of the other elementary feeder districts about a plan we have for implementation of the Common Core standards in math. So it's really going to be our journey, and we are going to make it the very best and the most rigorous it can be and the most engaging it can be for kids.